Darksome tales for dark nights.
The Pill Mills. Written by Scott Wilson. Performed here by Jason Hill. Chapter 1. I'm going to try to get this started. Years ago, I worked in a pill mill and horrible shit began to happen in Florida. For those of you lucky enough not to know, a pill mill is a place where doctors pump out prescriptions for absurd amounts of painkillers and Xanax, bolstered by laws in Florida that allowed them to do so with no oversight. Before I go into what kind of horrible shit became commonplace there, I'll take a moment to describe this incredible den of narcotics, desperation, and depravity. Mine was called Executive Medical Solutions, and we gave each and every patient the same prescription, regardless of the injury in the X-ray or MRI they brought. 180 30-milligram roxycodone. 45 15-milligram roxycodone, 32 milligram Xanax, and Soma, if they wanted it. We saw between 500 and 600 people every day as they filed quickly in and out of that disgusting hole in the wall. Rick Scott, Florida's governor, furiously defended the pill mills, gutting several attempts to stop them. This went on for about 7 years, with the drugs mainly going to Appalachia and other states notorious for poor white trash. Patients, or pillbillies, depending on who you ask, would shamble from their dusky trailer parks into filthy cars covered in plenty of dents and varying amounts of paint. They would cram as many people as possible and all drive to Florida to pick up their medication, usually with one drug dealer fronting all the money so they could sell the majority of the pills, often for $30 a piece for the 30s. Ever since I called that number on Craigslist and went for an interview 1 hour later without emailing a resume, I had a pit in my stomach. It was in a horrible part of town, the congested and strangely crowded center of West Palm Beach, in a strip mall that was almost entirely empty except for us, a Jamaican restaurant, and a massage parlor. Yeah, that kind of massage parlor. They actually complained to the cops about our patients going in to use the bathroom and passing out with needles in their arms. The normally empty parking lot was filled with junkies by 4 in the morning, every morning. If it wasn't for the absurd pay and free drugs, I would have noped the fuck out of there on the first day. The office itself was set up probably within 24 hours of the space being rented, and I could imagine the cheap gray paint peeling within an hour of it drying. The furniture was of the cheap institutional variety, with a fabric design from the 90s that was barely visible from the myriad of crusted stains the patients contributed every day. The office consisted of one large room that was split between a waiting room and our check-in desk where I worked. The medicine room took the bulk of this area. It was locked, filled with massive bank vaults that were filled with amazingly powerful drugs and some blonde girl named Jessica who filled the prescriptions while wearing a lab coat. She had previously been a Hooters girl. The manager, Debbie, was previously a stripper. It was just us and a rotating group of doctors who generally avoided conversation. At first, I thought it was because I knew I was doing something insanely immoral and illegal. While I am sure that is a part of it, I think I had picked up on something other than Aryan Brotherhood tattoos and a shit ton of money. Did I mention the shit ton of money and free drugs? With my habit, I'd be homeless in a week otherwise. I stuck around for a reason. The first day working was the day after my 10-minute interview with a beautiful but clearly very stressed former stripper named Deborah. Deborah had dark brown hair and enjoyed wearing expensive, slightly trashy, clothing that she would sometimes send me to pick up. courtesy of her gangster boyfriend who ran with the Aryan Brotherhood and owned the clinic as well as 5 others through various patsies. Debbie opened the place up at 5, long after the patients had gathered in the parking lot. The very first day should have been my last. I walked in at about 5:45 in the morning and was told that we did that because it made life difficult for the cops. I walked in to see Debbie behind the desk, getting wads of cash ready for the registers, and someone off to the right at the end of the hallway with the bathroom used by the patients. I couldn't see because whoever it was looked like they were halfway in or out of the bathroom. "Hey, I'm Wilkes." I waved towards the person in the bathroom and they seemed to shuffle forward. "I know, I hired you yesterday. Remember? Hey, do you—" Debbie was about to go on, but suddenly stopped when she realized I was talking to someone in the hallway. Her eyes shot up in terror. She glanced over to her left, but the wall in between her and that hall would have stopped her from seeing the person I had assumed was a coworker. The lights were off in that hallway, but I got the distinct impression that whoever was there was wearing a mask or had something wrong with their face. I saw a distinctly round, pale face. "Wilkes, I need to go right now. Get back to your car and go home for a minute. I'll pay you for this anyways." She was clearly suddenly panicked and rushed through the door with only her keys in her hand. I glanced over at the person moving slowly, almost shyly, down the hall, and Debbie almost jumped out of her skin. "Look at your car, Wilkes!" I turned around and looked at my car, hoping a junkie wasn't vandalizing it. No one was near it. Before I could turn around, I felt Debbie's hand on my back pushing me out. All right. Shouldn't we wait for whoever?" I was about to motion to the person who now seemed to be standing on one leg, fully outside of the bathroom now, and in the end of the hall, bending at a 90-degree angle at the waist towards me, with their face still directly aimed at mine. "Let's go. Just go home. Someone will call you when it's cool." She had already passed me while I stared. She was ahead of me now, but was suddenly dragging me by my arm towards our cars. She never looked back, and almost did a burn on the way out. The junkies lining the parking lot were baffled, and before I got out of the lot, I saw a line of junkies forming in front of the clinic, watching us. I saw the outline of someone else through the glass too, but I couldn't make that person out. I thought I would just go ahead and never call Debbie again, but in 4 hours there was a heavy knock at my door. 2 gigantic, roided-out muscle heads in bright blue and orange affliction shirts were standing on the other side, looking cramped between the massive lantana bushes that bordered my walkway. I almost didn't open the door, but one of them shouted, "It's all right. We're friends with Debbie." I opened the door and nodded in their general direction, but before I could say good morning, one of them shoved 2 grand in 20s in my hand. One of the muscleheads had thick red hair, and the other had a shaved head, one cauliflower ear, and a nose that looked like it had seen quite a bit. Both had an incredible variety of tattoos and excessively tight, ripped, and overly besequined pants. I'm a pretty tall guy at 6'3", but each of these guys had a couple of inches on me, and I wouldn't be shocked if someone told me that they were bodybuilders. Both also clearly had open carry permits or something, because they were wearing massive guns on the side of those absurd jeans. They almost didn't look real, considering the rest of the outfits. "Sorry for the inconvenience this morning. One of the patients hid in the bathroom and was probably hoping to rob the place or something. It's all taken care of now. You willing to show up tomorrow? Same time?" The redhead asked in a jovial tone, seemingly not expecting me to say yes. This explanation obviously didn't make much sense. The bald guy looked like he'd be just as happy to punch me in the face. Everything about this screamed bad idea, but I knew I needed a lot of money. Yeah, I muttered, stunned as I counted the wad he had just handed me. "Great." The redhead seemed genuinely delighted. Listen, my name is Dave. I'm going to give you my cell. If you ever see that person or anyone else like them again, just give me a call no matter what. Debbie will fill you in on the rest. Debbie definitely didn't seem to want to talk about it, and we never did. After that, creepy became a norm. I got accustomed to the junkies, the drugs, the river of psychic sleaze that powered through Florida and into the rest of the country. Deaths were constant. Patients, or someone with a bottle of their medication, would be found dead all over the country. The cops would call and tell us what number to fax their medical records to. Some of them told us what they thought of our little operation, but most were professional and probably didn't want to screw up an investigation. Once, I got a call from someone claiming to be a detective, but it sounded like a little kid. The kid was giggling the entire time. They said a guy was murdered, horribly, and told me his head was ripped off and his guts were all eaten because something thought he sucked. I assumed it was a prank, especially because the guy they were calling about was sitting in the lobby, still quite alive. I hung up. 2 days later, and a real detective called and told me the man's remains had been found. The detective this time sounded very genuine and extremely shaken. They didn't normally ask for any information other than the medical files, but she asked if anyone knew him or if we could tell her who he normally came in with. After I was finished talking to her, I looked up on the caller ID for the number that had called a couple of days ago. I don't know why I did this, but I hit dial the second I found the number, probably just out of impulse. I didn't put the phone to my ear, but I heard a horrifying yowling, almost like a cat, ripping from the speaker before I slammed the phone into its holster. After a couple of weeks, Dave stopped by and took me out to breakfast instead of my normal morning routine. We barely talked on the way there, but he told me that they were glad that someone stuck through it, and that there was a whole lot of room for advancement in the organization as long as I never pissed off George, Debbie's boyfriend and the head of the network. He also asked if I had seen anyone following me, presumably the police, before getting to the point. Listen, some stuff has been happening and I need you to tell me if you've seen anything weird. Anything at all. Especially in the mornings. Not just people. Anything. What do you mean? At first I thought he meant bugs or other potential listening devices, but then I remembered that creepy patient on my first day that no one wanted to talk about. He suddenly dropped the joking demeanor and looked as if I had just insulted his mother. You need to tell me if you have seen anything weird. Anything. A car where there shouldn't have been one. Any weird lights on your way to work. People doing anything. Weird. And you need to tell me this shit right the fuck now or the split second you see anything. Anything. I raced through my memories and remembered the creepy kid. I told him about that, but even he didn't seem to know what to make of it. He seemed to relax a bit though, knowing that I had made an effort to remember anything helpful. All right. There is something else. His voice cracked slightly and he shifted from intimidating to intimidated in less than a second. There's been this guy coming around. He's dressed like a Mormon. He acts real nice. He wears a bolo tie and one of those pieces of leather that Texans wear sometimes and has a comb over. If you see this guy, do not say one word to him. Not one fucking word. No matter what he says or does, you say nothing. He's going to come in, nothing we can do to stop him. But when he does, you help the person behind him in line and avoid looking at him in the eyes if you can. Let him talk to one of the other patients. He'll go away after he does. But do not even fucking say hi to this guy. You got that? Yeah, no problem. I didn't like talking to patients to begin with. I thought maybe this was someone who pissed him off and he didn't want his business anymore. But He seemed almost terrified by the time he was finished telling me. We finished our breakfast burritos and headed back. Sure enough, about 4 days later, the guy came in. He had shocking blue eyes, blonde hair, and a flawless comb-over, although he didn't seem to need it. His hair was thicker than a border collie's. And a white long-sleeve shirt tucked into immaculate blue pants with very thin white stripes down their sides. And a bolo tie with what looked like a piece of turquoise surrounded by ivory. He was smiling ear to ear, and each of his teeth were radiant. He may have been the only person there with a full mouth, other than the doctors. He looked like he was ready for a very nice church. Debbie saw him too, and she looked terrified. She grabbed me by the shoulder before he got to the counter. "Don't. Just don't," she said, urgently. I nodded, despite him being easily the least creepy person in the room by far, including in comparison to myself. It was at that moment, however, that I noticed that several other people, patients, were also horrified. One old woman with track marks running up both arms turned around and walked straight out when she saw him, and the room got quiet quick. "Good morning, friend," he beamed at me. I motioned to the woman behind him, who didn't seem to know who he was. She was happy to check in instead and told me her name so that I could look up her file. Excuse me, but could you help me? Please?" He seemed just as confused as anyone else would be who had just been rudely ignored in favor of a junkie. Except he was suddenly talking in the direction of the woman. She looked from me to him and then back again, but quietly continued her check-in, taking her pack of papers and sitting down, clearly sensing something was wrong. "I'm having a bit of trouble, and I was wondering if anyone might be able to help me." "Please?" He began to sound worried, but I noticed he was still staring at the area where the woman had previously been standing. He also looked in my general direction, but seemed to look right through me, as if he couldn't quite see me. I motioned for the next person while a fat hick with a Confederate flag tattoo ambled up to the man. "Might be able to help. What's up?" The man's speech was slurring and his eyes roomy, most likely from a solid dose of his medicine, or lack thereof. The well-dressed man turned to him sharply, put his hand on his shoulder. "How do I leave?" "What?" The patient was wondering whether this was a legitimate question or some kind of weird junkie thing, as is common, and double-checked the man's immaculate outfit. "How do I get out of here? Please? Please, there has to be a way out." The well-dressed man seemed frightened now. Debbie began to pull me away from the counter slowly, and when I looked at her, she had her finger over her lips. "Door's over there, man." At this point, the patient had realized that maybe there was a reason no one else had spoken to the man. He pointed the man to the door, and the man looked him in the eyes and smiled happily. "Thank you so very much." He happily bounded out of the office. Everyone else went back to normal, except Debbie, who ran into her back office to do as much of whatever as possible. The next morning, there was a paper envelope in front of the door. Inside was a handwritten note simply saying, "He lied." Next to the envelope was a small bit of something like leather with what looked like the Confederate tattoo the patient that tried to help the well-dressed man had. It was perfectly dried and looked like some kind of weird art project. When I looked up from these things, I desperately tried to pretend I didn't notice the well-dressed man standing in the middle of the road that divided the parking lot, staring at me. I don't think he was smiling anymore. Debbie told me she would deal with it, because we sure as fuck didn't need the cops around, but I never heard about it again. We saw junkies doing a lot of fucked up stuff, but One of the worst things was when people brought their kids into this narco playland. Once a young redhead mother and her little boy came in. She looked a little disheveled, but not nearly as bad as most patients. We had to get her to pee in a cup, so she asked me to watch her kid while she went to the bathroom. I said sure, and just a few seconds later she came back. But she didn't have the pee cup in hand. She just smirked at me, took the little boy's hand and walked him out. I guessed she decided not to do it because there was a line to go to the bathroom, but a few minutes later she came out. Again. And this time, she was looking for her little boy. Needless to say, she called the cops, but our security footage just showed the little kid wandering out by himself, and the cops blamed the mother. Apparently, they found the little boy's ear at the edge of the parking lot, but they kept putting up missing posters for a while. They eventually stopped putting new ones up, though.
Chilling tales for dark nights.